The notification came at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd just set my coffee mug down on the counter, ceramic, on a paper coaster, and reached for my phone to check the weather before my commute. The screen lit up with a Wells Fargo alert. A personal loan inquiry, my name, my social security number. A branch in Denton, Texas, 40 minutes from where my brother lived. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me later. I stood in my kitchen in Austin, still in the oversized t-shirt I'd slept in, and read the notification 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the counter, poured the rest of my coffee into the sink, and went to get dressed. I need to back up a little. Not much, just enough for you to understand why my first reaction wasn't panic or rage. It was something quieter and colder, like recognition. My name is Jenna. I'm 31. I'm a compliance analyst at a mid-sized financial services firm, the kind of job where you spend your days reviewing audit trails, flagging suspicious transactions, and writing reports that explain in careful language why someone did something they absolutely should not have done. I am very good at my job. I've been doing it for 6 years. My brother's name is Kevin. He's 26. He has a charisma that fills every room he walks into and a financial history that would make an underwriter cry. He has never held a job longer than 8 months. He has borrowed money from our mother, from our aunt, from 2 ex-girlfriends, and from me 4 times over 7 years, and repaid exactly none of it. Not a dollar. Not an apology. Just a rotating series of explanations that always ended with, "I'll make it right, I promise." My mother has always believed him. That is the part that took me the longest to understand. Not Kevin's behavior. That had been consistent since he was 19 and discovered that being the baby of the family came with structural advantages. It was my mother's belief in him that I kept trying to decode. She is a smart woman. She worked as a hospital administrator for 22 years. She can read a budget. She knows what a pattern looks like. But Kevin is her youngest, and I am the one who left. I moved to Austin at 23, right after I passed my Series 65. I wanted a fresh start, which is the kind of thing you say out loud, but what I actually meant was, I wanted to stop being responsible for everything. I wanted to stop being the person who was called when the car insurance lapsed, or the electric bill was overdue, or Kevin needed someone to co-sign on an apartment lease. I wanted to be a person who lived her own life. I sent money home anyway. Not every month, but often enough. 200 here, 500 there. Once after my mother's knee surgery, I covered the copay gap that her insurance didn't touch, just under $900. I told myself I was helping because I wanted to, not because I felt I had to. I'm not entirely sure that was true. So when the Wells Fargo alert appeared on my phone that Tuesday morning, my first thought wasn't, "This can't be right." My first thought was, he finally did it. I drove to work in silence. No music, no podcast. Just the highway and the sun coming up flat and orange over the tree line. I ran the scenario in my head the way I would run it at work. Facts only. What I knew: someone had initiated a loan application using my information at a branch in Denton. What I didn't know yet: how far along the application was, whether it had been approved, and what documentation had been used. What I suspected Kevin. Because of the Denton branch. Because he'd asked me twice in the past year to just be on the paperwork for things he wanted. Once for a car, once for a personal line of credit. And I'd said no both times. Because the last time I visited home, I'd left my overnight bag in the guest room and my wallet had been on the nightstand. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. I thought about it now. At my desk, before I opened my work email, I called the Wells Fargo fraud line. I reported the inquiry as unauthorized. The representative was professional and calm. She told me the application had been submitted in person the day before, that it was currently under review, and that a flag would be placed on the account immediately. She told me to file a police report and contact all 3 credit bureaus. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat quietly for 60 seconds. Then I opened my laptop and started the credit freeze on Equifax. My phone rang while I was working on Experian. It was my mother. I let it ring. She called again 10 minutes later, and again after that. On the fourth call, I picked up. She didn't say hello. She said, "Jenna, your brother is in a really bad place right now." "I know," I said. There was a pause. "He made a mistake. He knows that. But if this goes through the wrong way, it's going to follow him forever." I want to stop here and explain something about that sentence because it took me a long time to pass it fully. If this goes through the wrong way, not what he did was wrong. Not he shouldn't have done it. The wrong that my mother was concerned about was not the act. It was the consequence. "Mom," I said, "he used my social security number on a loan application. That's identity theft. It's a federal crime. He's your brother. I know who he is. He just needs you to cover it. To say you authorized it. The loan is only $8,000. You make good money, Jenna. You could." "No. Just this once, and he will absolutely pay you back. He has a line on something right now that—" "No." She went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice had changed in a way I recognized. It got very precise, like a scalpel. "If you report this," she said, "you will destroy him. You understand that? He will have a criminal record. He will never recover. And that will be on you." I had heard versions of this sentence my entire adult life, dressed up different ways in different contexts, but always with the same architecture. Your refusal to absorb this damage will cause damage, and the damage will be your fault. "I already reported it," I said. "Yesterday morning." She hung up. I sat with my phone in my hand for a moment. My pulse was even. Outside my office window, the parking lot was filling up. Someone was struggling with a coffee tray near the building entrance. I went and held the door open for them. That night I found the text from my mother waiting when I got home. It was long. I'll spare you the full version, but the relevant part was in the middle. She had spoken to a neighbor who was a retired HR director who had apparently told her that if she contacted my employer and reported that I had a history of financial misconduct within the family, that I had taken money, that I had mishandled accounts, that I was not trustworthy, my company would have to investigate. She wrote, "I don't want to do this, but you're not giving me a choice." I read the message once. Then I screenshotted it, airdropped it to my laptop, and saved a copy in 3 separate locations. Then I made dinner. I want to be honest about something. There was a version of that evening where I fell apart, where the weight of what was happening, my own mother threatening to call my employer, to lie about me, to unravel the career I had spent 6 years building because her son needed someone to absorb the consequences of what he'd done, where that weight became too much to carry standing up. I didn't fall apart. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because I'd been quietly preparing for something like this for longer than I knew. Maybe because the compliance work I do every day is essentially the practice of staying calm when you find something that should not be there. You don't panic. You document, you build the record, you follow the process. I had already built a record. What my mother didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had a colleague at work named Elise. Elise was our lead fraud investigator. She had been at the firm for 11 years. She had the kind of quiet, methodical precision that makes most people slightly afraid of her, which I found deeply reassuring. A few months earlier, over lunch, she had walked me through what family financial fraud typically looks like from a documentation standpoint. It had been a theoretical conversation, a case study. I thought about that conversation a lot in the days that followed. The police report had been filed the morning I made the fraud call. I had a case number. I had the Wells Fargo representative's name and the time of the call. I had my credit freeze confirmations. And now I had a text message from my mother explicitly stating her intention to make false reports about me to my employer. That last item was not a threat she had expected me to preserve. I didn't respond to her text that night. I forwarded it to Elise and asked if we could talk before the morning stand-up. Elise read the screenshot and set it down on her desk and said, "She put that in writing?" "She did." Elise looked at me for a moment. "What do you want the outcome to be?" I thought about it. Not the heat of the moment answer, the real one. "I want to not be threatened anymore," I said, "and I want it to be very clear to everyone involved exactly what happened here." Elise nodded. "Okay," she said. "Then let's make sure it's clear." I went about my regular week. I answered emails. I attended my Tuesday review meeting. I had lunch with a friend on Thursday. From the outside, I was doing nothing. Here is what was actually happening. The Wells Fargo fraud investigation had moved quickly once I filed the report. Because the application had been submitted in person, there was branch footage. Because Kevin had used his own ID to present as authorized on my account, a spectacular miscalculation, there was a clear chain of documentation. A fraud investigator had already called me for a follow-up interview. I had given them everything I had, including the timeline of the 2 previous requests Kevin had made for me to be on the paperwork. My company's HR team had received my mother's letter. Yes, letter. She'd followed up the text with an actual mailed letter, typed and signed, to our company's main office, addressed to my direct supervisor. In it, she described a pattern of financial dishonesty she claimed I had exhibited within the family, money taken from her, accounts misused, trust violated. None of it was true. All of it was documented as false by the same credit and financial records she apparently hadn't thought I had access to. My supervisor, to her significant credit, called me into her office the morning the letter arrived and handed it to me without comment and asked me if I wanted to explain the situation. I had my folder ready. A compliance analyst who files a police report, preserves all correspondence, has clean audit records going back 6 years, and arrives with a documented case including fraud investigation case numbers, is not someone who looks like a liability. I walked out of that meeting with my job intact and with my supervisor's personal assurance that the letter had been noted, logged as retaliatory, and that HR would handle it accordingly. I called Elise from the parking garage. "How'd it go?" "Fine," I said. "Of course it did," she said. "You brought receipts." I drove home. I parked. I sat in the car for a few minutes without moving. The relief was quieter than I expected, not triumph. More like the feeling when you've been holding your breath without realizing it, and then you remember you're allowed to exhale. I had booked a flight to Denver a few days earlier. My college roommate lived there now, in a little house near Washington Park, and she had been asking me to visit for over a year. I'd booked it on a Tuesday morning, 6 days before, in the 20 minutes after I filed the fraud report and before I started the Experian freeze. I remember thinking, whatever happens, I want to have somewhere to go. Not away from. Todd. My mother called twice the day my supervisor received her letter. I didn't answer. She texted 4 times. I read them all. None of them acknowledged that she had sent the letter. 2 of them asked me to call her back. One of them said Kevin was devastated. The last one said, "I hope you know what you've done to this family." I thought about that for a while. What I had done, I had reported identity theft to the bank where it was committed. I had cooperated with investigators. I had preserved evidence. I had told the truth. What my mother meant, I had stopped absorbing. I wrote her one message back. I spent about 40 minutes on it, drafting and deleting, trying to find the version that was honest without being cruel. Eventually, I landed on something shorter than I expected. "Mom, I love you. I'm not going to cover this and I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I hope Kevin gets the help he needs. But I'm not able to be the person who makes consequences disappear for him anymore. I hope you understand someday." She didn't respond. The Denver trip was 4 days. My friend has a golden retriever named something unpronounceable who sleeps at the foot of the guest bed and snores rhythmically all night, and I found it the most comforting sound I had heard in months. We walked around the park twice a day, drank wine on the back porch, drove up to Estes Park on Saturday, and talked about everything except the reason I'd needed to leave. She knew. She didn't push. On the last night, we sat outside with sweaters and the remains of a bottle of Pinot Gris, and she said, "How are you actually doing?" I looked at the yard. Her neighbor had a wind chime that was going softly in the dark. "I think I'm okay," I said. "I think I'm more okay than I've been in a long time." She refilled my glass. "Good." That's all she said. It was exactly enough. What happened with Kevin? The Wells Fargo fraud investigation concluded. The loan application was denied and flagged. The case was referred to local law enforcement in Denton, and Kevin was contacted by a detective. I don't know everything that happened after that. I wasn't there, and my mother stopped including me in family communications. What I do know is that there were consequences, and that for once they were his to carry. What happened with my mother? We didn't speak for almost 4 months. Then one evening in late October, she called and I answered, and we talked for a long time. Not about Kevin, not about the letter, about how tired she was, about how much of her energy had gone toward managing him for years. She didn't apologize directly, but she said something I hadn't expected her to say. She said, "I think I've been afraid that if I let him face things, he'd disappear." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about how fear can look, from the outside, exactly like loyalty. How protecting someone from consequences can feel indistinguishable from love until you look at what it's actually doing to them. To everyone around them, to the person who keeps being asked to soften the landing. I'm not angry at my mother. I was, for a while, but I understand something now that I didn't before. The people who get recruited to absorb damage for someone else are usually people who love the person doing the recruiting. The love is real. The mechanism is just broken. I bought a house in Austin the following spring. Nothing dramatic. A small craftsman bungalow in Crestview, with a front porch and a yard that needed work and neighbors who left tomatoes on each other's steps in summer. I closed on it on a Thursday, got the keys, and sat on the floor of the empty living room eating a sandwich I'd picked up from a deli down the street. The floor was original hardwood. The afternoon light came through the front windows in long, pale panels. The house was completely quiet. I thought, this is mine. Nobody can ask me to put it up for something I didn't choose. I don't have a tidy resolution to offer you. My family is not repaired. Kevin and I don't talk. My mother and I talk sometimes, carefully, with the particular tenderness of people who have hurt each other and are trying not to do it again. It is not the relationship I would have chosen, but it's an honest one. Here is what I know. There is a version of my life where I covered that loan, where I told the bank it was authorized, where I absorbed the $8,000 and the debt and the silence and went back to sending money home and waiting for the next time. I know exactly what that life looks like because I lived the shape of it for years. I chose differently, not because I stopped loving them, because I finally understood that love doesn't require you to disappear. I dropped my old Venmo account the week after I got back from Denver. I created a new one, changed the email address, and told exactly 2 people the new handle. It felt like a small thing. It was not a small thing. Sometimes the door you close is the one that lets the air back in. I used to think that doing the right thing would feel triumphant. Like there'd be a moment, clear and bright, where you'd know it was over and you'd won and everything would settle into place. That's not what it felt like. When my supervisor slid that letter across her desk and looked at me without accusation, just waiting, the feeling wasn't vindication. It was something more tired than that. Something like, of course it came to this. Because it had been building for years. Every time I wired money and said nothing, every time Kevin needed a cosigner and I declined and felt guilty about it, every time my mother's voice got precise and surgical on the phone, none of that was random. It was all moving in one direction. What I understand now, and couldn't have articulated then, is that the way we treat people teaches them what to expect from us. I had spent years being available in ways that cost me. Not because I was weak, but because I genuinely loved them and didn't know yet that love isn't the same thing as unlimited access to your resources, your reputation, your silence. Kevin learned that if he needed something, I was the variable most likely to bend. My mother learned that when she applied pressure, I absorbed it. I had trained them both, without meaning to, over a very long time. That's not blame directed at myself. It's just cause and effect. Actions accumulate, patterns form, and eventually the pattern either holds or it breaks. Mine broke on a Tuesday morning when a Wells Fargo alert lit up my phone, and I felt underneath the shock something almost like relief, because it was finally legible. It wasn't ambiguous anymore. I didn't have to wonder if I was being too sensitive or too rigid or too unwilling to be a team player. It was on the screen in plain language, and I knew exactly what to do. The intelligence I'd built in my professional life, the discipline of documentation, of following process, of not panicking when you find something that shouldn't be there, that's what carried me through it. Not cleverness, not revenge, just the habit of staying calm and building a record. That habit came from years of work, years of paying attention, years of taking my job seriously even when it was unglamorous. The same qualities that made me good at compliance are what made it impossible for them to burn me down. There's something worth sitting with in that. The things you invest in quietly, without audience, without applause, those are the things that hold when something tries to take you apart. And the courage part. Because it did take courage, the particular kind that has no adrenaline in it, just a steady refusal. That came from somewhere I'm still mapping. I think it came from finally believing that my life was mine, not a resource to be drawn down, not a backup plan for someone else's choices. Mine. Jenna closed a door that needed to be closed. The house she bought in Crestview is small and the yard needed work, and the light through the front windows in the afternoon is something she didn't expect to love as much as she does. That's not a footnote. That's the point. You don't have to destroy anyone to stop letting them destroy you. You just have to decide, once, clearly, without negotiation, that your life belongs to you. That decision has a cost. I won't pretend otherwise, but so does the alternative. And I know which one I can live with.